A handwritten letter from a stubborn Nebraska farmer changed everything. He had received a handwritten letter from William Bill Anderson, a stubborn fifth-generation farmer from Heartland County, Nebraska, inviting him to visit his struggling family farm. What followed wasn't just a heated exchange, but the beginning of an unlikely partnership that would change American agriculture forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. William Bill Anderson hadn't slept much the night before. How could he? After sending that letter to the White House 3 months ago, a moment of frustration after losing another 40 acres to foreclosure, he never expected a response. Then came the call from some White House staffer, followed by the Secret Service advance team, and now, unbelievably, the day had arrived. President Donald Trump was actually coming to Pinecrest Farm. The morning dawned crisp and clear over the Nebraska plains. Bill had been up since 4:30 a.m., same as any other day, checking irrigation lines and repairing a fence damaged in last week's windstorm. But by 9 a.m., he'd showered and changed into his newest pair of overalls. Not for Trump's benefit, he told himself, but because his late wife Margaret would have insisted on it. You think this is crazy, don't you? Bill asked his daughter Emma as they watched sheriff's deputies setting up roadblocks at the end of their long gravel driveway. Emma, pushing a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, gave her father a measured look. At 35, she had her mother's features, but her father's stubborn pragmatism. 5 years ago, she'd abandoned her promising career as an agricultural scientist at the University of Nebraska to come home when cancer took her mother. Now she managed the farm's finances, trying desperately to keep their heads above water. "I think it's bold," she replied, squeezing his weathered hand. "But that's always been your way, hasn't it?" The distant sound of helicopter rotors cut through the morning stillness. 3 black helicopters appeared on the horizon, circling once before continuing westward. A security diversion, Bill guessed. 10 minutes later, the real procession appeared. A line of black SUVs and police vehicles kicking up clouds of dust. As they wound down the country road toward Pinecrest Farm. "Here we go," Bill muttered, squaring his shoulders as he walked to the edge of the porch. The American flag that had flown beside their farmhouse for decades flapped violently in the strengthening prairie wind. The motorcade rolled to a stop in the packed dirt clearing that served as the farm's front yard. Secret Service agents emerged, first scanning the property with practiced efficiency, speaking quietly into their wrist microphones. Local sheriff's deputies established a perimeter, keeping the small group of reporters and curious neighbors at the end of the driveway. Bill's neighbor, Randy Harmon, had called the whole thing a publicity stunt. Maybe it was, but Bill couldn't forget the way his grandfather, Jacob Anderson, had taught him that a man's word and a handshake still meant something in this part of the country. So here he stood, ready to speak his truth directly to the President of the United States. The door of the middle SUV opened, and Donald Trump emerged into the bright Nebraska sunshine. His signature red tie stood out against the rural landscape like a cardinal in a wheat field. He paused, buttoning his navy suit jacket before striding forward with the confidence of a man accustomed to commanding attention. Behind him followed several aides clutching tablets and smartphones, looking distinctly uncomfortable as their polished shoes encountered actual dirt. One slender woman in a pencil skirt quickly jotted something in a leather-bound notebook before falling into formation several paces behind the president. Bill stood his ground as Trump approached, neither rushing to meet him nor extending a hand prematurely. His father had taught him that a man shouldn't seem too eager, even when greeting the most powerful person in the world. "Never thought you'd actually come," Bill called out, his voice carrying across the yard as Trump approached. "Figured my letter would end up in some staffer's shredder," Trump's lips curled into that familiar smirk that Americans had seen countless times on television. "I get lots of letters, Bill. Thousands every day." He reached the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at the farmer. "Yours was different. Said you had some things to say that I needed to hear." Bill nodded curtly, finally extending a uncalloused hand. "I appreciate you coming, Mr. President, but I won't sugarcoat my words. That's not who I am." Trump's handshake was firmer than Bill expected as he replied, "I wouldn't expect anything less." The whir of camera shutters in the distance punctuated the moment, tomorrow's news cycle already taking shape. A young Secret Service agent with a buzz cut spoke quietly into Trump's ear, likely reminding him of schedule constraints. Behind them, Emma emerged from the house, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "Dad, maybe we should take this inside," she suggested, eyeing the darkening western horizon. "Looks like we might get that thunderstorm they've been predicting." Trump turned, seeming to notice Emma for the first time. "And you must be the daughter, the scientist, right? My people briefed me on the family." Emma nodded, slightly surprised to be acknowledged. "I was in agricultural science at the university. Now I'm just trying to keep our books balanced." She offered her hand. "Emma Anderson. Smart move coming." "You're back to help your dad," Trump said, shaking her hand before turning to survey the property. The weathered red barn with its fading paint, the equipment shed with machinery dating back decades, the fields stretching toward the horizon. "Nice spread you've got here. How many acres?" 2,300, Bill answered, a hint of pride in his voice. Or it was. "Down to 1,800 now after the bank took the north section last year." Something flickered in Trump's eyes. Interest, perhaps, or just political calculation. "Let's talk inside, shall we?" As they entered the modest farmhouse, Trump's security detail exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't the controlled environment they preferred. Two agents quickly swept through the home's interior, while others established positions outside windows and doorways. The Anderson farmhouse told the story of 5 generations in wood and photographs. The oak dining table had been handcrafted by Bill's great-grandfather. Photos of Anderson men standing beside their first tractors, their wives, their children, lined the walls alongside county fair ribbons and community service awards. A worn American flag in a display case, the one that had draped the coffin of Bill's father, a Vietnam veteran, held a place of honor above the fireplace. Trump paused to examine a black-and-white photograph of a stern-looking man standing beside. "A team of horses? Your grandfather?" "Great-grandfather," Bill corrected. "Jacob Anderson. Came here with nothing but $20 and a wagon in 1889. Built this house with his own hands." Emma gestured toward the kitchen table, already set with 3 coffee mugs and a freshly baked apple pie cooling on the counter. "Please sit down, Mr. President." Trump's chief of staff, hovering anxiously nearby, checked his watch. "Sir, remember we have the rally in Omaha at 3. Trump waved him off. "We'll make it. This is why I came." He settled into a chair at the kitchen table, seeming almost too large for the modest farmhouse furniture. His security positioned themselves discreetly but vigilantly around the perimeter of the room. Once seated, Bill wasted no time. "Mr. President, I'll be direct. Your agricultural policies are crushing family farms like mine. These corporate agriculture conglomerates get the subsidies, while we get the scraps." Trump leaned back in his chair, that familiar defensive posture apparent even in this unfamiliar setting. "I've done more for American farmers than any president in history. The farm bills, the subsidies." Bill's weathered hand slammed the table, causing several Secret Service agents to tense. "With all due respect, sir, that's Washington talk. My property taxes have doubled in 5 years. Equipment costs are through the roof. A new combine harvester costs more than my entire farm, made last year. And these trade wars, they've cost me 30% of my export business to China." The senior Secret Service agent shifted his stance slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the farmer's forceful tone. But Trump held up a hand to keep him at bay, studying Bill with narrowed eyes. The global economy is complicated, Bill. Sometimes short-term pain leads to long-term gain. We're renegotiating better deals, fairer deals for American producers. Pain, Bill scoffed, standing up to pour coffee into the 3 chipped mugs on the table. The pot trembled slightly in his hand, not from intimidation, but from the arthritis that had been his constant companion for the last decade. Try watching land your great-grandfather homesteaded get auctioned off to corporate buyers. Try explaining to your grandchildren why the family legacy ends with you. Emma placed the plate of homemade apple pie on the table, slicing it carefully. My father means no disrespect, Mr. President, but this isn't just business for us. This is our heritage, our identity. She served a slice to Trump. Every apple in this pie comes from the orchard my great-grandmother planted. Some things can't be measured in quarterly profits. The room fell silent as Trump took a bite of the pie, chewing thoughtfully. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the old window panes. A storm was building, both outside and in this kitchen. Good pie, Trump finally said, looking around them. Modest kitchen. The calculated political mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something more contemplative. For once, he wasn't performing for cameras or rallies. Tell me what exactly you think I'm missing, Bill. Bill exchanged a surprised glance with his daughter. Was the president actually asking for his opinion? Not telling, but asking. You're missing what happens in places like this when policies get made by people who've never had dirt under their fingernails, Bill said, his voice softening slightly. Last year, when that trade dispute with China hit, my soybean prices dropped 40% overnight. My neighbor Harlan Wilson, third-generation farmer, couldn't make his loan payments. Sunrise Agricultural Corporation bought his land at auction for 60 cents on the dollar. Emma nodded. It's happening all over the county. Corporate consolidation is killing rural America. These aren't just statistics, Mr. President. These are families, communities, traditions. When a family farm goes under, we lose more than acreage. Trump sipped his coffee, his expression unreadable. So, what would you do differently? Easy to criticize, harder to solve problems. Bill leaned forward, surprised to find himself in what felt like an actual conversation rather than the confrontation he'd expected. I'd start by leveling the playing field. These mega-corporations get tax breaks and subsidies that small farms can't access. Their lobbyists make sure of that. We need antitrust enforcement in agriculture, regulations that protect local water supplies from corporate waste, and fair trade deals that don't use farmers as bargaining chips. A crack of thunder punctuated his words, making one of the younger aides jump. Rain began to patter against the windows. And what about innovation? Trump countered. Big operations can afford new technology, better efficiency. That's just capitalism. Bill, competition is capitalism, Bill retorted. Monopoly isn't. My family has adapted for 5 generations, through the Dust Bowl, through droughts, through every agricultural revolution. We're not afraid of innovation. We're afraid of a rigged system. Something shifted in Trump's expression. Genuine. Interest, perhaps. Politicians rarely heard such unfiltered opinions, surrounded as they were by handlers and yes-men. Come with me, Bill said suddenly, rising from his chair. I want to show you something. If you've got time, that is. Trump checked his watch, then nodded to his concerned chief of staff. We've got time. He stood, following Bill toward the door. Sir, his chief of staff interjected, the rain. I'm not made of sugar. Trump replied dismissively. I won't melt. Emma grabbed 2 rain jackets from hooks by the door, handing one to her father, and after a moment's hesitation, offering the other to the president. It was an old waxed canvas coat, the kind farmers had worn for generations. Trump paused, looking at the weathered garment, so far from the tailored suits he typically wore. For a moment, Emma thought he might refuse. Then, surprising everyone, he slipped it on over his suit jacket. It was slightly too small, the sleeves ending above his wrists, but he didn't seem to mind. "Lead the way, Bill," he said, adjusting the unfamiliar collar. As they stepped onto the porch, the rain fell in sheets across the farmyard. Secret Service agents scrambled to form a protective circle, but Trump waved them back, following Bill down the porch steps and into the downpour. Emma trailed behind, an extra umbrella in hand, watching as these two vastly different men, both stubborn in their own ways, walked side by side into the storm. Bill headed not toward the fields or the barn, but toward a small hill behind, the house. The rain plastered his grey hair to his forehead as he trudged upward, his boots finding the familiar path even as mud squelched beneath them. Trump followed, his polished leather shoes already caked with Nebraska soil, the borrowed jacket darkening with moisture. To Emma's surprise, he made no complaints, asking no questions as they climbed. At the top of the hill stood a small family cemetery, enclosed by a wrought-iron fence. Bill pushed open the gate and entered, moving directly to a row of weathered headstones beneath an ancient oak tree. "This is what I wanted you to see," Bill said, gesturing to the graves. "Jacob Anderson, 1867-1942, founder of this farm. Next to him, his son Frederick, who expanded the property during the Depression when everyone else was losing land. Then, my father Robert, who modernized our operation in the 60s while serving 2 tours in Vietnam." Trump stood silently, rain dripping from his hair as Bill continued. "And here's where my wife Margaret rests, and someday, me too." Bill turned to face Trump directly, rain streaming down his weathered face. "Mr. President, these people didn't build this place for it to become another corporate acquisition. They built it as a legacy, as a trust." Trump studied the headstones, then looked out over the vast expanse of farmland stretching in all directions. From this vantage point, the patchwork of fields told a story. Some thriving with crops, others lying fallow or gone wild, the pattern of ownership and loss written on the landscape itself. "You know," Trump said finally, "my father started. Our company, too, built it from nothing." "Then you understand legacy," Bill replied. "Imagine watching what your father built being dismantled piece by piece, not because you didn't work hard enough, but because the system was designed to let bigger players squeeze you out." For a long moment, the only sound was the rain pounding on the canvas jackets and the distant rumble of thunder. The President of the United States and the Nebraska farmer stood side by side, 2 men from different worlds finding unexpected common ground among the graves of generations past. Finally, Trump turned to Bill. "Show me the rest." "Show me what?" "I need to see to understand." Bill's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he nodded. "All right then, let's start with the equipment shed. I've got a tractor there older than you are, still running because we can't afford the new models with their computerized systems. We're not allowed to repair ourselves." As they made their way back down the hill, Emma watched in astonishment. This wasn't the confrontation she had expected. It wasn't a photo op or a shouting match. It was something far rarer in American politics, a moment of genuine listening. The rain continued to fall as Bill led the presidential entourage toward the old equipment shed where generations of Anderson farming history awaited. The president's security detail followed at a respectful distance, equally surprised by the unexpected turn of events. None of them could have predicted what would follow in the coming weeks, or how this unlikely meeting in the Nebraska rain would change agricultural policy in America. But for now, it was simply a farmer and a president, walking and talking as equals on Anderson land. The rain continued to fall as Bill Anderson led President Trump toward the equipment shed. Secret Service agents followed at a distance, their dark suits now soaked through, faces professionally impassive despite their discomfort. Trump's chief of staff kept checking his watch, visibly anxious about their schedule, but the president himself seemed unconcerned with the ticking clock. The old equipment shed had stood for nearly 70 years. Its metal roof, patched in dozens of places, created a symphony of pings and patter as raindrops struck it. Bill heaved open the sliding door, its ancient tracks groaning in protest. "Watch your step," Bill warned as they entered. The earthen floor had turned muddy near the entrance. "And mind your head on that beam. Already gave me more concussions than I care to count." Inside, the shed was a museum of American agricultural history. A 1953 John Deere Model 40 tractor occupied the center space, its green and yellow paint, faded but still recognizable. Around it stood farming implements spanning decades, some still in use, others retired but kept for parts or sentiment. "This was my father's first tractor," Bill said, patting the John Deere's massive rear wheel. "Bought it when he came back from Korea. Before that, everything was done with horses and manpower." Trump circled the vintage machine, genuine interest in his eyes. "Still runs?" "Fired her up last month," Bill nodded with pride. These old machines were built to last and to be repaired by the people who owned them. He walked over to a newer tractor in the corner, its sleek design a stark contrast to the John Deere's utilitarian bulk. "Now look at this 2022 model. Computerized everything. If something breaks, the company won't even sell me the parts to fix it myself. I have to call a certified technician, wait days, and pay whatever they charge." "Right to repair," Trump mused. "I've heard about this issue." "It's killing us," Bill said. "My grandfather could fix anything with baling wire and determination. Now I need a software engineer to restart a stalled engine." He pointed to a complex-looking component on the newer tractor. That's a $500 sensor. Goes bad every couple years. Can't run without it, can't fix it yourself. Can't even buy an aftermarket version because they've patented the design." Emma leaned against the doorframe, watching the unexpected scene unfold. The President of the United States getting a lesson in agricultural economics from her father in a muddy equipment shed during a rainstorm. "Dad's been fighting this battle for years," she added. "It's not just tractors. It's combines, irrigation systems, even the GPS guidance systems. The manufacturers have monopolized repairs." Trump walked around the newer tractor, running his hand along its glossy shell. "Never thought about it that way. In real estate, we always have options for contractors, materials. In farming, those options are disappearing," Bill said. 5 companies control most of the seeds we plant. 4 companies slaughter nearly all the beef in America. 3 companies make most of the equipment." He gestured expansively. "When I started farming with my dad 40 years ago, we had choices. Now, it's take it or leave it." Lightning flashed outside, followed by a cannon crack of thunder that made even the stoic Secret Service agents flinch. One of them whispered something into his wrist microphone, likely concerning the weather conditions. "Mr. President," the Chief of Staff interrupted, his voice tense with urgency. "The storm is intensifying. Weather Service has issued warnings. We should really head back to Omaha." Trump looked from the aide to Bill, then glanced at the rain pounding outside. For a moment he seemed torn between duty and curiosity. 5 more minutes, he decided, turning back to the farmer. "Bill, you've got my attention. What else should I see?" Bill exchanged a glance with Emma, who nodded slightly. This wasn't how either of them had expected the visit to go. "Well, since you're asking," Bill said, leading them deeper into the shed, "there's something else I want to show you." He approached a workbench along the back wall covered with tools and parts. Pulling open a drawer, he removed a thick manila folder and handed it to Trump. "What's this?" Trump asked, opening the folder to reveal a stack of documents. "My paperwork from last year," Bill explained. "Look at page 3. That's the application for federal drought relief after we lost 60% of our corn crop. Never saw a dime of it. Trump flipped through the pages, scanning the complex forms with narrowed eyes. Why not? Failed to meet criteria 4B, Bill said bitterly. Our farm wasn't large enough to qualify. Meanwhile, Horizon Agricultural Group, which owns 60,000 acres 2 counties over, received $8 million in relief funds. Emma stepped forward. I spent weeks on those applications, Mr. President. I have a master's degree, and even I could barely understand the requirements. They're designed for corporations with legal departments, not family farms. Trump continued flipping through the paperwork, his expression darkening. This is ridiculous. That's farming in America, Bill said simply. The big get bigger, the small disappear. The chief of staff cleared his throat again, more insistently this time. Sir, we really need to— I heard you the first time, Trump snapped, closing the folder and handing it back to Bill. He looked at the farmer with newfound respect. Let me ask you something straight. What would actually help someone like you? Not talking points, not theory. Real action. Bill seemed taken aback by the directness of the question. He'd expected to be heard, perhaps, but not to be asked for solutions. 3 things, he said after a moment's thought. First, enforce antitrust laws in agriculture. Break up these monopolies. Second, reform subsidy programs so they benefit small and medium farms, not just massive operations. And third, protect our right to repair our own equipment. Trump nodded, slowly. That's specific. I like specific. Another lightning strike, closer this time, followed by immediate thunder. The lights in the shed flickered ominously. Sir, the chief of staff pleaded, the pilots are concerned about takeoff conditions. If we delay further. This time, Trump acknowledged the urgency. All right, we're going, he turned to Bill. I guess our conversation gets cut short. As they prepared to dash back to the house through the intensifying downpour, Trump paused, turning back to Bill. That old tractor, the John Deere, you said it still runs? Bill nodded. Like the day my father bought it. Show me, Trump said, surprising everyone. Sir, the schedule, his aide began. They can wait, Trump interrupted. I want to see this. Bill couldn't suppress a smile as he approached the vintage tractor. Hasn't been started in a couple months, but she should fire right up. He climbed onto the metal seat, adjusted some controls, and pumped a lever several times. Choke's a bit finicky, he explained, turning a key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life, filling the shed with its throaty rumble. Black smoke puffed from the exhaust stack before clearing to a steady stream. 70 years old? And still running, Bill said with evident pride, raising his voice over the engine. They don't make 'em like this anymore. Trump circled the machine, genuinely impressed. Mind if I try? Bill blinked in surprise. You want to drive it? Why not? Trump shrugged, already removing the borrowed rain jacket. The Secret Service agents exchanged alarmed glances, but none dared object, as the President of the United States prepared to climb aboard a vintage tractor. One agent hurriedly whispered something into his communications device, presumably updating the security situation to his increasingly confused superiors. Bill climbed down, gesturing to the seat. Controls are simple compared to modern ones. Clutch here, gear shift here, throttle on the right. Trump, with surprising agility for a man his age, climbed up onto the tractor. His suit pants immediately collected a smear of grease from the seat, but he either didn't notice or didn't care. Bill gave him a quick tutorial on the controls, then stepped back. Just ease off the clutch slowly, he instructed. Trump grabbed the massive steering wheel, a childlike grin spreading across his face. He released the clutch too quickly, and the tractor lurched forward with a jerk, nearly stalling. Easy now, Bill cautioned, unable to keep the amusement from his voice. She's powerful but stubborn. Trump tried again, this time releasing the clutch more gradually. The tractor moved forward smoothly, its iron wheels crunching over the earthen floor. He guided it in a small circle inside the shed, his security details scrambling to maintain their protective positions around the slow-moving vehicle. Emma stood in the doorway, phone in hand, discreetly recording this surreal moment. The President of the United States, in his business suit and red tie, driving a 1953 tractor in her father's shed during a thunderstorm. No one would believe this without evidence. After completing his circle, Trump brought the tractor to a stop near its original position. The grin hadn't left his face. That, he declared, switching off the engine, was actually fun. Bill helped him down from the seat. Farming has plenty of hard days, Mr. President, but moments like this, connecting with the machines that work this land, that's what keeps us going. As they prepared to make a dash through the rain back to the house, something had changed between the farmer and the President. The shared experience, however brief, had created an unexpected bond. They sprinted through the downpour, Trump again donning the borrowed rain jacket. By the time they reached the farmhouse porch, they were both soaked, despite their best efforts. Inside, Emma quickly provided towels, while one of Trump's aides fretted about his ruined shoes and the mud on his suit pants. Trump himself seemed unconcerned, using the towel to dry his face and hair, which had lost its carefully styled appearance in the rain. "Your farm," Trump said, looking at Bill as he dried off. "It's more than just a business, isn't it?" Bill nodded, surprised by the perception. "It's everything. It's who we are." "I understand that better now," Trump admitted, handing the borrowed jacket back to Emma. "Business is in my blood too. Different kind, but still, legacy matters." The Chief of Staff approached once more, his expression making clear that no further delays would be tolerated. "Sir, the motorcade is ready. We really must leave now to make the rally." Trump nodded, then turned to Bill, extending his hand. "This wasn't what I expected when I decided to come here." "Me neither," Bill admitted, shaking the offered hand. "Figured you'd listen for 5 minutes, give me some talking points, and be on your way." "I still might disappoint you," Trump said with surprising candor. "Politics is complicated. Just remember what you saw today," Bill replied. "Remember the people behind the policies." Trump held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then nodded. "I will." He turned to Emma. "Thank you for the pie. Best I've had in a long time." With that, the presidential entourage began moving toward the door. Secret Service agents positioned themselves for the departure, communications flowing through earpieces. The brief connection forged in the equipment shed already seemed to be fading as the machinery of the presidency reasserted itself. At the door, Trump paused one last time. "Bill," he called back, "that folder, the application forms. Would you mind if I took those with me? Have my people look at them?" Bill's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You're serious?" "Completely." Bill retrieved the folder and handed it to Trump, who passed it to an aide with instructions to keep it safe and dry. "I'm not making any promises," Trump cautioned, "but I'll look into it." And then he was gone, hurrying through the rain to the waiting motorcade, surrounded by his protective detail. The vehicles pulled away, churning the farmyard mud, red and blue lights reflecting in the puddles that had formed during their visit. Emma joined her father on the porch, watching until the last vehicle disappeared down the long driveway. "Well," she said, "that was unexpected." Bill nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Question is, was it just good theater, or did we actually get through to him?" "You think anything will come of it?" Emma asked. Bill shrugged, turning to head back inside. "Probably not. Men like that make lots of promises." Yet there was a hint of something in his voice that hadn't been there before, not quite hope, but perhaps the seed of it. "At least he drove the tractor," Emma said with a smile, following him in. "That's something no one can take away from us." "Your mother would never have believed it," Bill chuckled, closing the door against the continuing rain. 3 weeks passed. The rain-soaked presidential visit became a story Bill told at the Heartland County farmers' cooperative meetings. Then, at Willard's diner in town, earning him a mixture of admiration and skepticism from his fellow farmers. Most believed nothing would come of it. Just another politician's drive-by visit to real America, forgotten as soon as Air Force One lifted off. Bill himself tried not to dwell on it. There was too much work to be done. Fields to tend, equipment to maintain, bills to worry over. The visit had been interesting, even momentarily encouraging, but farming had taught him harsh lessons about hope and disappointment. Then, on a sweltering Wednesday afternoon, as Bill was replacing an irrigation pump in the north field, his phone rang. Emma's name flashed on the screen. "Dad," she said when he answered, her voice vibrating with an emotion he couldn't immediately identify. "You need to come back to the house, now!" "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing's wrong," she replied, "but you need to see this. They're talking about you on CNN." Bill's stomach dropped. "What? Why?" "Just come see," Emma insisted. 20 minutes later, mud-streaked and sweating, Bill burst through the farmhouse door to find Emma in the living room, television volume turned up high, a notebook open on her lap, filled with hasty scribbles. Screen, a panel of political commentators, was discussing what they called the Anderson Initiative, a series of executive orders and policy recommendations unveiled by President Trump that morning focusing on agricultural reform. The president specifically cited his visit with Nebraska farmer William Anderson as the catalyst for these changes, the anchor was saying. The package includes antitrust investigations into agricultural monopolies, reforms to subsidy programs aimed at benefiting small and medium-sized farms, and provisions supporting farmers' right to repair their own equipment. Bill sank into his armchair, stunned into silence. "It's been non-stop for the past hour," Emma explained, her eyes wide with disbelief. "They're calling it the biggest agricultural policy shift in decades." On screen, the image changed to Trump, speaking from the White House Rose Garden. "A few weeks ago, I visited a family farm in Nebraska. I saw firsthand the challenges facing American farmers. Bill Anderson and his daughter Emma showed me that our system isn't working for the people who feed this country. Today, I'm taking action to fix that." Bill stared at the screen, unable to fully process what he was hearing. His name, his farm, from the president's mouth, and not just empty words, but actual policy changes that addressed the very issues they had discussed in the equipment shed. "There's more," Emma said, turning up the volume as a Department of Agriculture official began explaining details. The reforms were comprehensive. Investigations into price fixing in the meat processing industry, updated subsidy formulas that advantaged farms under 5,000 acres, a federal endorsement of state-level right-to-repair legislation, simplified disaster relief application procedures with priority processing for family farms. "He actually listened," Bill murmured, shaking his head in disbelief. "He actually did something." Emma was already on her laptop, reading through the full text of the executive orders. "This is real, Dad. These aren't just promises. These are signed orders." The phone began ringing. Neighbors, friends, reporters seeking comment. Bill let it go to voicemail, still trying to absorb the reality that his impromptu tractor, demonstration and blunt conversation had somehow shifted national agricultural policy. "You think it'll make a difference?" Emma asked, looking up from her computer. Bill ran a hand through his grey hair, leaving a smudge of dirt on his forehead. "If they follow through, yeah, it could change everything." Just as he finished speaking, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Told you I wouldn't forget. More to come." DJT Bill showed the screen to Emma, whose eyes widened. "Is that actually—" "Appears so," Bill said, suddenly laughing, a genuine, surprised laugh that felt unfamiliar after years of stress and struggle. The unexpected had happened. A single conversation, honest, unfiltered, human, had somehow cut through the political noise and created real change. For once, someone in power had not just listened, but acted. The next morning, reporters descended on Pinecrest Farm. News vans parked along the driveway, satellite dishes pointed skyward. Journalists in city clothes, trying not to step in anything unpleasant as they sought the farmer who had influenced the president. Bill, uncomfortable with the attention but recognizing its importance, agreed to a few interviews. Standing beside his vintage John Deere, now famous in its own right, he spoke plainly about his conversation with Trump, the challenges facing family farms, and his cautious optimism about the new policies. "I just told him the truth," Bill explained to a CNN reporter as cameras rolled. "Didn't expect him to really hear it, much less do something about it. But that's what happened. He saw this place, not just looked at it, but really saw it, saw what it means, and somehow that mattered." As the media circus continued, Emma received a call from the Department of Agriculture. They wanted Bill to serve on a newly formed family farm advisory council that would guide implementation of the new policies. His first-hand experience and blunt communication style were exactly what they needed. "They want me to what?" Bill asked when Emma told him, certain he had misheard. "They want you in Washington, Dad, to make sure these changes actually help real farmers." Bill looked out the kitchen window at the land his family had worked for generations, land that had been slipping away year by year as economics and policy aligned against families like his. Now somehow he had a chance to help change that trajectory, not just for himself, but for farmers across America. "What do you think?" Emma pressed. "Will you do it?" Bill Anderson, who had never imagined himself as anything but a farmer, faced a decision he never expected to make. The land needed him, but perhaps in a different way, the country needed him too. "I'll do it," he said finally. "On one condition, you take over here. Keep this place running. I need to know Pinecrest Farm is in good hands." Emma smiled, tears welling in her eyes as she nodded. "Deal." 2 days later, as Bill packed a suitcase for his first trip to Washington, his phone rang again. "The same unknown number. Bill Anderson," he answered. "Bill, it's Donald Trump," came the familiar voice. "Seeing the news coverage? Making quite a splash, aren't we?" "Seems that way," Bill replied, still uncomfortable with the notion of casual conversation with the president. "Listen, when you get to D.C., come by the White House. I want to introduce you to some people, and bring that daughter of yours, the scientist. We need smart people who understand both theory and practice." "Will do," Bill said, then added, "Thank you for listening, for doing something." There was a pause on the line. "You know, Bill, in my world, everyone wants something. They flatter, they scheme, they play games. You just told me the truth. Straight up. That's rare. Just how I was raised," Bill replied simply. "Well, it made a difference. See you in Washington." As the call ended, Bill sat on the edge of his bed, the half-packed suitcase beside him. Outside his window stretched the fields his family had worked for 5 generations. The future of Pinecrest Farm, and farms like it across America, remained uncertain. One policy shift, however significant, wouldn't solve every problem overnight, but something fundamental had changed. A door had opened. A voice had been heard, and it had all started with a handwritten letter and a stubborn farmer who refused to give up on his legacy. Bill Anderson had never been to Washington, D.C. As his plane began its descent, he pressed his weathered face to the window, taking in the sprawling metropolis below, the shining monuments, the grid of streets, the Potomac River winding through it all. This world couldn't have been more different from the endless horizons of Nebraska farmland. "Nervous?" Emma asked from the seat beside him. She'd insisted on accompanying him for this first trip, concerned about her father navigating both the physical and political landscape of the capital alone. "Not nervous," Bill replied. adjusting the unfamiliar collar of his new dress shirt. "Just out of place," Emma smiled, patting his hand. "They invited you because you're different, because you're real." The aircraft touched down at Reagan National Airport with a gentle bump. Bill tensed slightly. He preferred having his feet on solid ground, preferably ground he owned. As they taxied to the gate, his phone buzzed with a text message. "Car waiting for you at arrivals. Driver has your name. Meeting at USDA first, White House tomorrow. DJT." Bill showed the message to Emma, who raised her eyebrows. "Still can't believe the President of the United States is texting you directly." "Strange times," Bill agreed, tucking the phone away. In the terminal, a suited driver held a sign reading, "Anderson." Minutes later, they were gliding through Washington traffic in a black Suburban with tinted windows, both Andersons silent as they took in the unfamiliar surroundings. "First time in D.C.?" the driver asked, catching Bill's eye in the rear view. "Mirror, first time east of the Mississippi," Bill admitted. The driver chuckled. "Well, you've made quite an impression for a first-timer. Your name's all over the news." Bill shifted uncomfortably. Fame had never been his goal, nor was it a comfortable fit. He was here for one reason only, to make sure the promises made would translate into real help for family farms like his. There. First stop was the United States Department of Agriculture headquarters, an imposing structure on the National Mall. In the lobby, they were met by Dr. Catherine Rivera, the newly appointed Under-Secretary for Rural Development, a position that had remained vacant for nearly a year before the Anderson initiative. Prompted a flurry of appointments. "Mr. Anderson, Ms. Anderson," Dr. Rivera greeted them warmly. "Thank you for coming. You've caused quite the stir around here." "Not intentionally," Bill said, shaking her hand. "Sometimes those are the most effective kinds of stirs," she replied with a knowing smile. "Come, the secretary is waiting." They followed her through security checkpoints and up elevators, eventually reaching a wood-paneled conference room where several people sat around a massive table. At its head was Secretary of Agriculture Thomas Wilson, who rose as they entered. "The man of the hour," Wilson said, approaching Bill with an extended hand. "William Anderson, your name is on everyone's lips in agricultural policy circles." "Just Bill is fine," he replied, uncomfortable with the formality. "I'm still just a farmer." "A farmer who got the president's attention like no one else has," Wilson noted. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." For the next 2 hours, Bill and Emma sat through briefings on the implementation plans for the Anderson initiative. Officials with sophisticated PowerPoint presentations outlined timetables, funding allocations, and projected outcomes. The jargon was dense, the acronyms impenetrable, the process labyrinthine. Finally, during a momentary pause, Bill raised his hand. "Mind if I ask a question?" The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. "Of course," Secretary Wilson nodded. "This all sounds impressive," Bill began, choosing his words carefully. "But when will actual farmers see actual results? Because from what I'm hearing, there's a whole lot of planning and not much doing." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Emma suppressed a smile. Her father had always had a talent for cutting through bureaucratic fog. Secretary Wilson cleared his throat. "Well, Mr. Anderson, policy implementation is a complex—" "That's just it," Bill interrupted. "It shouldn't be that complex. Farmers are losing their land while we sit in rooms like this talking about implementation phases." He leaned forward. "The president sent me here because I speak plainly, so here it is plain. Farmers need help now, not after 2 years of committees." The tension in the room was palpable. Bill had just broken every unwritten rule of Washington discourse. No interrupting, no challenging, no demands for immediate action. But then, surprisingly, Dr. Rivera laughed. "This," she said, gesturing toward Bill, "is exactly why you're here, Mr. Anderson, to keep us honest." Secretary Wilson's expression remained fixed for a moment, then softened into a reluctant smile. "You're right, of course. We've become too accustomed to the slow pace of change." He turned to his staff. "Let's revise the timetable. I want emergency. Relief measures active within 30 days. The rest can follow. But let's get something tangible to farmers immediately." Bill nodded, satisfied. "That's more like it." As the meeting concluded, Dr. Rivera approached the Andersons. "The president was right about you," she said to Bill. "You don't play games." "Never learned how," Bill replied. "Keep it that way," she advised. "That's your power here." Back in the Suburban, heading toward their hotel, Emma nudged her father. "Not bad for your first Washington meeting." Bill grunted. "Just said what needed saying." "That's apparently revolutionary in this town," Emma observed, looking out at the passing monuments. "I'm starting to understand why the president connected with you. In a world of yes men, you're the only one who gave him an unfiltered truth." Bill considered this. Still doesn't explain why he listened. Maybe he's been waiting for someone who wasn't afraid to speak to him like a normal person, Emma suggested. Maybe that gets lonely being surrounded by people who only tell you what they think you want to hear. Bill hadn't considered this perspective before. Donald Trump as someone isolated by his own power, surrounded by sycophants and strategists. It was a humanizing thought, one that complicated his previously straightforward view of the man. Their hotel was far more luxurious than anything Bill was accustomed to. A suite at the Willard Intercontinental, arranged and paid for by the White House. As Bill stood at the window, looking out at the city lights, the unreality of the situation struck him anew. 3 weeks ago, he'd been fixing irrigation lines and worrying about bank payments. Now he was influencing national agricultural policy, staying in a 5-star hotel, preparing to meet with the president at the White House. Life had taken a turn he could never have anticipated when he sent that angry, handwritten letter on a whim. Morning came with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Bill, dressed in his new suit, purchased hastily in Omaha before their flight, while Emma offered encouraging words and last-minute adjustments to his tie. "Remember," she said as they prepared to leave, "you're not there to impress anyone. You're there to speak for people who haven't had a voice." Bill nodded, drawing strength from his daughter's confidence in him. The White House was both more and less imposing than Bill had imagined. The security was intense, multiple checkpoints, metal detectors, ID verifications. But the West Wing itself was smaller than television had led him to believe. The corridors narrower, the rooms more human-scaled. They were led to the Roosevelt room, where several people already waited. Agricultural industry representatives, lawmakers from farming states, and economic advisors. Bill recognized some faces from television, others from agricultural conferences he'd attended over the years. A murmur spread through the room as he entered. "That's him, the farmer, Anderson," reinforcing his sense of being an outsider. A curiosity in this realm of power brokers. Senator James Harrison of Iowa approached, hand extended. "Bill Anderson, I've been hearing about you. Quite the splash you've made." "Not intentionally," Bill repeated his now standard response. "Those are the best kind," Harrison replied, echoing Dr. Rivera from the day before. "Tell me, what do you think of the initiative? Will it actually help farmers in your position?" Before Bill could answer, the door opened, and President Trump entered the room. Everyone rose immediately. Trump, looking considerably more formal than he had in the rain-soaked equipment shed, surveyed the room until his eyes found Bill. "There he is," Trump announced, crossing directly to Bill with an extended hand, bypassing several important figures who had positioned themselves strategically near the door. "The man who taught me more about farming in an hour than all the briefings I've had in years." Cameras flashed as they shook hands, capturing the moment for news cycles to come. Bill was acutely aware of his every movement, every expression, knowing this handshake would be analyzed and discussed across the country. Good to see you again, Mr. President, he said simply. Donald, Trump corrected, surprising those within earshot. We drove a tractor together. I think we're past formalities. This drew a genuine laugh from Bill, dispelling some of his tension. Fair enough. Trump turned to Emma, greeting her with equal warmth, then addressed the room. Everyone, if you haven't met them yet, this is Bill and Emma Anderson. What they don't know is that they're the reason we're all here today. With a gesture toward the table, Trump invited everyone to sit. Bill found himself positioned directly across from the president, with Emma beside him. Let me tell you a story, Trump began, settling into his chair. A few weeks ago, I received a letter, an actual handwritten letter, from a Nebraska farmer who didn't mince words about what my administration was getting wrong. Now, I get criticism all the time, but this was different. This wasn't political, this was personal. Bill felt the weight of every gaze in the room shifting to him. So I decided to meet this farmer, Trump continued. And let me tell you, it didn't start well. Bill here gave me an earful. Nervous laughter circulated the table, but then something happened. He showed me his farm, his family's history, the reality of what policies made in this city mean for the people who feed America. Trump leaned forward, and he let me drive a 1953 John Deere tractor. More laughter, more genuine this time. That visit changed my perspective, Trump admitted, his tone becoming serious, because for once I wasn't hearing talking points or political calculations. I was hearing the truth from someone with dirt under his fingernails and generations of wisdom behind his words. Bill shifted uncomfortably at the praise, catching Emma's supportive glance, which is why, Trump continued, I've asked Bill to take a formal role advising this administration on agricultural policy, not as a token gesture, but because we genuinely need his perspective. This announcement sent a ripple of whispers around the table. Bill himself was taken aback. He'd agreed to serve on an advisory council, but this sounded more significant. I've established a new position, Trump explained. Special Advisor for Family Farm Affairs, reporting directly to me and the Secretary of Agriculture. And I'm appointing Bill Anderson to that position. The room erupted in a buzz of conversation. Bill sat stunned, while Emma gripped his arm in surprise. This hadn't been discussed, hadn't been planned. It was entirely unexpected. Mr. President, Bill began when he found his voice, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for something like that. Trump waved away his concern. That's exactly why you're qualified, Bill. You don't think you know everything. You just know what's real. The meeting continued, with discussions of specific policy implementations, funding allocations, and legislative priorities. Throughout, Trump repeatedly turned to Bill for his perspective, elevating his input above those of career bureaucrats and lobbyists. It was a clear message to everyone in the room. This farmer's voice mattered. As the meeting concluded, Trump asked Bill and Emma to remain behind. When the room had cleared, leaving only them and a couple of senior staff members, Trump's demeanor shifted subtly, less performative, more direct. So will you take the position, he asked Bill. I'm a farmer, not a politician, Bill replied hesitantly. I don't know the first thing about navigating Washington. Good, Trump said bluntly. Washington has enough politicians. What it needs are more people who understand the real impact of what we do here. He gestured toward the window. Out there, beyond the Beltway, where policies become reality. Emma spoke up. What exactly would this role entail? Regular meetings with me and the agricultural team, review of proposed policies before they're finalized, outreach to farming communities, travel to assess conditions firsthand. Trump looked directly at Bill. Most importantly, telling me when we're getting it wrong. No filters, no politics, just like you did at your farm. Bill considered the offer, its implications, its responsibilities. What about Pinecrest Farm? I can't abandon it. You wouldn't need to live in Washington full-time, Trump clarified. We'd bring you in as needed. Modern technology makes the rest possible. He glanced at Emma. and it seems you have capable hands to keep things running." Bill looked at his daughter, who nodded her encouragement. "I'll do it," Bill decided, "on one condition." Trump raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Name it." "When you come to decisions that will affect farmers' lives, you come to Nebraska first. See the impact firsthand, not just through reports and statistics." Trump considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Deal." He extended his hand, which Bill shook firmly. As they left the White House, stepping into the bright Washington sunshine, Emma turned to her father. "Special advisor to the president. Not bad for a man who claims to be just a farmer." Bill shook his head, still processing the turn his life had taken. "I'm still not sure this is real, or if it will actually change anything." "It already has," Emma pointed out. "Look at the policy shifts that have already happened. And now you'll have a direct line to the president." Bill nodded slowly. "I just hope I can make it count for all the farmers who don't get presidential visits, who don't have a voice." "That's exactly why it has to be you," Emma said firmly, "because you'll never forget who you're really representing." The next 6 months transformed both Bill Anderson and American agricultural policy. The position of Special Advisor for Family Farm Affairs, created for a Nebraska farmer who had never aspired to political influence, became a powerful conduit between rural America and Washington decision-makers. Bill maintained his straightforward approach, refusing to adopt Washington's diplomatic language or political maneuvering. In meetings where others spoke in carefully constructed paragraphs designed to impress rather than inform, Bill spoke in simple sentences that cut to the heart of issues. His authenticity became his greatest asset. Meanwhile, Emma managed Pinecrest Farm in his frequent absence, implementing new techniques she'd studied during her academic career, but never had the opportunity to apply. Under her management, the farm began to thrive again, becoming a testing ground for innovations that might help other family operations. The Anderson initiative expanded beyond its initial scope. What began as emergency measures to address immediate crises evolved into structural reforms, antitrust actions against agricultural monopolies that had gone unchallenged for decades, revisions to inheritance tax laws that had forced families to sell land to pay death taxes, new credit programs specifically designed for small and medium farms, and groundbreaking right-to-repair legislation that prevented equipment manufacturers from monopolizing repairs. President Trump, finding unexpected political advantage in championing family farms, made agricultural reform a centerpiece of his economic agenda. His rallies now featured farmers on stage alongside him, including Bill Anderson, who remained uncomfortable with the spotlight, but recognized its strategic value for the cause. The most significant moment came 6 months after Bill's appointment, when he received a call from the president late one evening. "Bill, we just got word that Dixon Agricultural Corporation withdrew its lawsuit, challenging our antitrust actions. They're going to comply with the divestiture orders." This was monumental news. Dixon, one of the largest agricultural conglomerates in America, had fought viciously against requirements to sell off monopolistic holdings in seed production and meat processing. Their capitulation represented a turning point. That's incredible, Bill managed, the implications sinking in. "What changed their minds?" "They saw the writing on the wall," Trump replied, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Public opinion had turned against them. Farmers were organizing, and they knew we weren't backing down." After the call, Bill sat on his porch, looking out over the fields that had been in his family for generations, fields that just months ago he had feared would be lost to corporate ownership. Now, for the first time in years, he felt genuine hope, not just for Pinecrest Farm, but for family farms across America. The following week, President Trump flew to Nebraska for a major policy announcement. The venue was not a convention center or hotel ballroom, But Pinecrest Farm itself, specifically the equipment shed where Trump had driven the 1953 John Deere tractor. Secret Service agents once again swarmed the property, setting up security perimeters and communication systems. Media outlets constructed temporary platforms for cameras. Local farmers arrived in pickup trucks, parking along the road when the driveway overflowed. Standing beside the vintage tractor, now polished to a shine for the occasion, Trump addressed the gathered crowd and the national audience watching via livestream. 6 months ago, I stood in this very spot and learned a valuable lesson from Bill Anderson, he began, gesturing to Bill, who stood nearby, still uncomfortable in the spotlight. I learned that policies aren't just words on paper. They're the difference between a family keeping its heritage or losing everything they've built over generations. The president went on to announce the next phase of the Anderson Initiative, a comprehensive rural infrastructure package focused on high-speed internet access, modernized electrical grids, and improved transportation networks for agricultural regions. Family farms aren't relics of the past, Trump declared. They're the foundation of America's future, and under my administration, they will have the support they need not just to survive, but to thrive. As applause swept through the crowd, Bill caught Emma's eye. She stood at the edge of the gathering, smiling with a mixture of pride and amazement at the transformation of their lives, their farm, and potentially the future of American agriculture. Later, as the event concluded and the presidential motorcade prepared to depart, Trump pulled Bill aside for a private word. You know, when I got your letter, my first instinct was to ignore it, he admitted. Just another complaint from another voter. But something about your bluntness made me curious. Bill nodded. Never thought it would lead to all this. Sometimes the most important changes come from the most unexpected beginnings, Trump said, looking around at the farm that had become a symbol of his agricultural agenda. Who would have thought a heated debate with a stubborn farmer would reshape national policy? Not me, that's for sure, Bill chuckled. As they shook hands one more time, Trump held Bill's gaze. Don't let Washington change you, Bill. Your value is in staying exactly who you are. No chance of that, Bill assured him. I'm a farmer first, always will be. The president nodded, satisfied, then turned to board his waiting vehicle. As the motorcade pulled away, Bill rejoined Emma on the porch of the farmhouse that had been in their family for 5 generations, the farmhouse that would now remain. In their family for generations to come. What are you thinking? Emma asked, noticing her father's contemplative expression. Bill looked out over the land he loved, land that now represented not just his family's heritage, but a turning point in American agricultural policy. I'm thinking about that rainy day when I showed him our family cemetery, Bill said quietly, the moment when he started to really see what this place means, not just as a business, but as a legacy. Emma nodded. One conversation changed everything. That's the thing about truth, Bill replied, watching the last vehicle disappear down the long driveway. Sometimes, if you're lucky, it actually gets heard. And as they stood together on the porch of Pinecrest Farm, father and daughter both knew that the story that had begun with a handwritten letter born of frustration had transformed into something neither could have imagined. A partnership that had changed not just their lives, but potentially the lives of family farmers across America for generations to come. What had started as an unexpected meeting between a president and a farmer had become proof that sometimes the most powerful force for change is simply the courage to speak truth to power and the wisdom to listen when truth speaks back. 1 year had passed since Bill Anderson's appointment as special advisor for family farm affairs. The initial excitement had given way to the grinding reality of Washington politics, a world Bill was still learning to navigate. Though he maintained his office at Pinecrest Farm, conducting most business virtually, his presence in the capital was increasingly required as the Anderson initiative faced mounting opposition. On this crisp October morning, Bill sat in his kitchen, a cup of coffee growing cold beside him as he reviewed the latest policy proposal from the Department of Agriculture. Emma entered, dressed in work clothes, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "You look worried," she observed, pouring herself coffee. Bill pushed the tablet toward her. "Dixon Agricultural Corporation is pushing back hard. They've technically complied with the divestiture orders, but they've restructured into 5 separate companies that still operate in lockstep. Their lobbyists are working overtime to undermine everything we've accomplished." Emma scanned the document. "They're proposing exemptions to the right to repair legislation, claiming intellectual property protection and safety concerns." Bill nodded. "It's a smoke screen. They just want to maintain their repair monopoly." His phone rang, the special line reserved for White House communications. Bill answered, activating the speaker. "Bill Anderson." "Bill, it's Donald." The president's voice filled the kitchen. "Have you seen the latest numbers?" "Just reviewing them now," Bill confirmed. "This is big, really big." Trump's voice carried the energy that had become familiar over their year of collaboration. "The Rural Economic Development Index is up 12%. 12%, Bill, and farm foreclosures are down 28% from last year." Bill allowed himself a small smile. These weren't just statistics, they represented real families, keeping their land, real communities avoiding the slow death of corporate consolidation. "It's progress," he acknowledged, "but Dixon's counteroffensive is gaining traction." "Of course it is," Trump replied, unsurprised. "They've got deep pockets and a lot to lose. That's why I need you in Washington tomorrow. Senate Agricultural Committee hearing. They need to hear directly from you." Bill grimaced. Public testimony wasn't his strength. He preferred one-on-one conversations or small group discussions where nuance wasn't lost. "Can't Secretary Wilson handle it?" "Wilson's great at policy, terrible at connecting with people," Trump said bluntly. "You're our secret weapon, Bill. When you talk about farming, people listen because they know you're the real deal." After hanging up, Bill stared out the window at his fields, now thriving under Emma's management. Her agricultural science background, combined with traditional farming wisdom passed down through generations, had transformed Pinecrest Farm into a model operation that frequently hosted visitors studying their methods. "You should go," Emma said, interrupting his thoughts. "Everything here is under control." Bill nodded reluctantly. "Pack my good suit, I guess." The Senate Agriculture Committee hearing room buzzed with tension. Senators lined the curved dais, staffers whispered urgently to their bosses, and the gallery was packed with spectators, a mix of media, industry representatives, and farmers who had traveled to witness the proceedings. In the front row sat executives from Dixon Agricultural Corporation and its newly formed independent subsidiaries, their expensive suits and confident postures conveying their belief that money still spoke louder than principle in Washington. Bill, dressed in his one good suit that still somehow managed to make him look like a farmer attending a funeral, sat at the witness table alongside Secretary Wilson and Dr. Rivera. Before them, microphones waited to carry their testimony to the committee and, via live stream, to farming communities across America. Chairman Senator Robert Fletcher gavelled, "The session to order. This committee meets today to evaluate the implementation and impact of Executive Order 13982, commonly known as the Anderson Initiative. We'll hear testimony regarding its effects on the agricultural sector and consider proposed modifications." What followed was 2 hours of technical testimony from economists, industry representatives, and policy experts. Dixon's team presented data suggesting the initiative had created market inefficiencies and unnecessary regulatory burdens. Their arguments were polished, their charts impressive, their language designed to sound reasonable while concealing their true objective: dismantling the reforms that threatened their dominance. When Bill's turn came, he approached the microphone, with none of the slick confidence of the corporate representatives. He had no PowerPoint presentation, no prepared remarks approved by communication specialists. He had only his lived experience and his unwavering commitment to speaking plainly. "Mr. Anderson," Chairman Fletcher began, "as the namesake of this initiative and special advisor to the President, please share your assessment of its implementation and effects." Bill leaned forward slightly. "First, I want to be clear that I never asked for my name to be on any of this. I'm just a farmer who spoke his mind when given the chance." This drew a gentle ripple of laughter from the gallery. "As for the effects," Bill continued, "I could quote statistics showing how farm bankruptcy filings are down, how rural small business creation is up, how young people are returning to farming for the first time in decades. Those numbers matter, but they don't tell the whole story." He paused, looking directly at the Dixon executives. "What matters more is what I've seen traveling to farms across this country over the past year. In North Carolina, I met a third-generation tobacco farmer who was able to transition to sustainable crops because new financing became available. In California, I visited an immigrant family who could finally afford to repair their irrigation equipment themselves rather than paying corporate technicians triple the cost. In Wisconsin, I watched a dairy cooperative processing their own milk because the antitrust actions broke the processor monopoly in their region." Bill leaned forward, his voice strengthening. "These aren't just policies on paper. They're the difference between families keeping or losing their heritage." Senator James Harrison of Iowa, a known ally of agricultural corporations, interjected. "Mr. Anderson, while these anecdotes are touching, Dixon Agricultural has presented compelling evidence that these regulations have increased consumer prices and reduced overall market efficiency." Bill didn't flinch. "With respect, Senator, market efficiency often means efficient extraction of wealth from rural communities. When a family farm is replaced by corporate operations, the profits don't stay local. They go to distant shareholders and executives. The hometown equipment dealer closes. The local bank handles fewer deposits. The school loses enrollment as families move away. That's the hidden cost of your efficiency." The room had grown silent, even the usually distracted senators paying close attention now. "As for consumer prices," Bill continued, "they've increased by an average of 1.8%. That's less than half a penny on a dollar. Ask yourself, is it worth half a penny to ensure that farming knowledge passes to the next generation rather than being replaced by corporate management algorithms? Is it worth half a penny to keep rural America alive?" "Senator." Harrison frowned. "Mr. Anderson, you seem to harbor a personal bias against large agricultural businesses." "I don't have anything against size itself," Bill replied. "I have something against abuse of power. When 5 companies control 80% of meat processing, that's not the free market. That's a cartel. When farmers can only buy seeds from 2 global conglomerates who also sell the only chemicals that work with those seeds, that's not competition, it's controlled dependence." For the next hour, Bill fielded increasingly hostile questions from senators aligned with corporate interests. Unlike the polished Dixon representatives who deflected and obfuscated, Bill answered directly, often exposing the flawed premises behind the questions themselves. By the time Chairman Fletcher gavelled the session closed, the mood in the room had shifted. The Dixon executives no longer looked confident. Several were furiously typing on their phones, likely strategizing their response to testimony that had undermined their carefully crafted narrative. As Bill gathered his notes, a young man approached, mid-20s, with the weathered hands and direct gaze of someone who worked the land. "Mr. Anderson, I'm Carter Reynolds, from Georgia, third-generation peanut farmer." He extended his hand, which Bill shook firmly. "I just wanted to thank you." Because of the financing programs in the initiative, I was able to buy back land my grandfather had to sell during the 90s farm crisis. It's back in our family now." Bill nodded, a lump unexpectedly forming in his throat. This was why he endured the political games and uncomfortable hearings for stories like this one. "Glad to hear it," he managed. "Keep it in your family." "That's the plan, sir," Carter assured him, "and there are thousands more like me. We've started organizing Family Farmers Alliance. Would you be willing to speak at our convention next month?" Before Bill could respond, his phone buzzed. "The president need to take this," he apologized to Carter. "But yes, send the details, I'll be there." As Carter walked away, Bill answered the call. "You're trending on social media," Trump announced without preamble. That testimony was exactly what we needed. Authentic, powerful. The Dixon people are scrambling. "I just told the truth," Bill said, making his way through the crowded hallway toward the exit. "That's why it worked," Trump replied. "The truth has a way of cutting through noise. But Dixon won't take this lying down. They're already calling. Congressional allies planning their counterattack. This fight is just beginning." Bill stepped outside into the autumn Washington sunshine, where reporters immediately swarmed, shouting questions about his testimony. Secret Service agents, assigned to him after death threats from extremist groups opposed to agricultural reform, formed a protective barrier. "Mr. Anderson, do you believe the initiative goes far enough?" "What's your response to accusations of anti-corporate bias? Will you be taking a more formal role in the administration?" Bill ignored the questions, allowing his security detail to guide him toward the waiting car. As they drove away from Capitol Hill, he gazed at the imposing government buildings that had once seemed so distant from his reality. Now they were part of his life, symbols of both the power that had threatened his way of life and the mechanisms through which he was now fighting to preserve it. His phone rang again. This time it was Emma. "You're all over the news," she said, when he answered. "That testimony was powerful, Dad." "Just spoke my mind," Bill replied, a response that had become his standard deflection of praise. "Well, your mind speaking has consequences," Emma continued, her voice carrying an undercurrent of concern. "I've been getting calls. Dixon representatives showed up at the farm today." Bill straightened in his seat. "What? What did they want?" "To open a dialogue," they said. "Offered to tour the farm, discuss mutually beneficial opportunities." The skepticism in Emma's voice was evident. "I told them we weren't interested." "Good," Bill affirmed. "They're looking for leverage, trying to find ways to co-opt or discredit the message." "There's more," Emma said, her voice dropping. "After they left, I found a drone hovering over the Northfield. When I approached, it flew off, and I've noticed unfamiliar vehicles parked along the county road." Bill's jaw tightened. The political had become personal again, but in a far more concerning way. "Document everything. Take photos, and call Sheriff Donovan to increase patrols past the property." "Already done," Emma assured him. "But Dad, this is escalating. These aren't just policy disagreements anymore." "No," Bill agreed grimly. "They're fighting for their existence. Companies like Dixon are built on the consolidation model. Buy out or crush small operations, consolidate power, extract maximum profit. We're threatening that model, which means we're threatening everything they've built." After ending the call, Bill sat in troubled silence as the car wound through Washington traffic. The driver, a Secret Service agent who had been with him since his appointment, glanced in the rearview mirror. "Everything okay, sir?" Bill met his gaze. "We've stirred up a hornet's nest, Agent Taylor, and now the hornets are circling my farm." The agent nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I'll coordinate with local law enforcement in Nebraska. We'll increase your family's security protocols." "Appreciate that," Bill said, looking out at the Washington Monument gleaming in the distance. Funny thing is, a year ago my biggest worry was whether the North irrigation pump would make it through another season. Now I'm worried about corporate espionage and security threats. That's what happens when you challenge power, sir, Agent Taylor observed. The powerful don't surrender it willingly. Bill's phone buzzed with a news alert. He opened it to find video of his testimony already circulating widely, with the hashtag #RunFarmersWithAnderson trending nationally. Farmers across the country were sharing their own stories of how the initiative had helped them, creating a groundswell of support that would make it politically difficult for senators to side openly with Dixon. Another alert followed, an invitation to appear on Sunday morning, news programs to discuss agricultural policy. Then another, a request from the National Farmers Union to address their leadership conference. The movement was growing. What had begun as one farmer's frustrated letter had evolved into national momentum for change. But with that growing influence came growing opposition, and Bill knew the real fight was just beginning. As his car pulled up to his Washington hotel, he saw a group of farmers gathered outside, holding signs reading, "Stand with Bill and Family Farms Forever." They cheered as they recognized him, pressing forward as his security team escorted him inside. In the lobby, his phone rang once more. The president again. "Bill, change of plans. Need you at the White House tonight. Emergency meeting." "What's happened?" Bill asked. Dixon's played their next card. They're threatening to close processing plants in key states, claiming the antitrust regulations make them economically unviable. It's blackmail, trying to create panic about food supply. Disruptions before the midterms. Bill sighed. The corporate counterattack was beginning in earnest. "I'll be there," he promised, already turning toward the door. As he headed back out, nodding to the supportive farmers still gathered outside, Bill Anderson, once just a Nebraska farmer worried about making his loan payments, steeled himself for the bigger battle ahead. The Anderson initiative had changed the game, but powerful interests were determined to change it back. What had started as a heated debate in a farmhouse kitchen had escalated into a national struggle for the soul of American agriculture. And whether he had chosen this role or not, Bill was now at the center of it all, a reluctant symbol of resistance against corporate domination of the American heartland. The car pulled away, heading toward the White House, where the next chapter of this unexpected journey awaited. The White House Situation Room was never meant for agricultural policy discussions. Designed for national security crises and military operations, its windowless confines had hosted presidents during wars, terrorist attacks, and international standoffs. Tonight, however, it hosted a different kind of battle, one for the future of America's food supply. Bill Anderson sat midway down the long table, feeling distinctly out of place among cabinet secretaries and White House strategists. The room hummed with tense conversation as everyone awaited the president's arrival. Secretary of Agriculture Wilson leaned toward Bill. "Dixon's orchestrating this brilliantly," he murmured. "They've announced planned closures of processing facilities in 5 swing states, claiming our antitrust actions make operations financially untenable. They're creating panic about meat shortages right before midterms." "It's a bluff," Bill replied firmly. "Those plants are profitable. They're just trying to force us to back down." The door opened and President Trump entered, followed by his chief of staff and economic advisors. The room immediately fell silent as he took his seat at the head of the table. "Let's get straight to it," Trump began without preamble. "Dixon's playing hardball. They think they can create a food crisis narrative and force us to abandon the Anderson initiative." He looked around the table. Options? What followed was 30 minutes of policy debate, economic analysis, and political calculations. Some advisors suggested a tactical retreat, temporarily suspending certain regulations to diffuse the crisis. Others advocated holding firm, calling Dixon's bluff. National security experts outlined potential impacts of processing plant closures on food supply chains. Throughout it all, Bill remained silent, listening intently as Washington insiders dissected the situation through their specialized lenses of expertise. Finally, Trump turned to him. "Bill, you've been quiet. What's your take?" All eyes shifted to the farmer, whose presence in this room remained an anomaly that still caused discomfort among some traditional power brokers. "Dixon's counting on fear," Bill said simply. "They believe if they threaten America's dinner table, we'll cave. They're also counting on nobody understanding how meat processing actually works." He leaned forward. "But here's what they don't want you to know. There are dozens of medium-sized processors who would expand overnight if those plants closed. The infrastructure exists, the workforce exists. The only reason these smaller operations haven't grown is that Dixon's market power has suppressed them." Trump's expression sharpened with interest. "You're saying we could call their bluff?" "I'm saying we could do better than that," Bill replied. "We could turn their threat into an opportunity to actually implement what the initiative intended all along, a more distributed, resilient food processing system." Bill pulled out his tablet and opened a map application, which an aide quickly projected onto the room's main screen. It showed the locations of meat processing facilities across the United States. Large corporate operations in red, medium-sized, independent facilities in blue. For every Dixon plant threatening closure, there are 3 to 5 independent processors within a 100-mile radius that could expand capacity, Bill explained, zooming in on specific regions. What they need is emergency capital and expedited regulatory approvals to scale up. "That would take time," the Secretary of Commerce objected. "Meanwhile, we'd have supply disruptions." "Some," Bill acknowledged, "but far less than Dixon wants everyone to believe, and we'd emerge with a stronger, more competitive processing sector that's no longer dominated by a few corporations." The room fell silent as the implications of Bill's proposal sank in. It was bold, risky, and completely counter to Dixon's expectations. Trump studied the map, then looked at Bill with newfound appreciation. "They think they're playing chess, but you're changing the board entirely." "I'm just thinking like a farmer," Bill replied. "When a storm's coming, you don't just hope it misses. You figure out how to come out stronger after it passes." Trump turned to his chief of staff. "Get me the heads of the top 20 independent processors on a conference call tomorrow morning and draft emergency funding authorizations for processing capacity expansion." To his communications director, "We need to get ahead of the narrative. Not Dixon threatens food supply, but administration accelerates competition in meat processing." The energy in the room shifted palpably as the defensive posture transformed into offensive strategy. For the next 2 hours, they hammered out details of what would be called the Rural Processing Revitalization Plan, an emergency initiative to expand independent meat processing capacity while exposing Dixon's threats as the corporate blackmail. As the meeting concluded, Trump asked Bill to remain behind. When the room had cleared, the president settled back in his chair, studying the farmer with evident curiosity. "You know what impressed me most just now?" he asked. "Everyone else in that room was looking for ways to manage the crisis. You were the only one looking for ways to solve the underlying problem." Bill shrugged. "That's farming. You don't just patch the fence when a storm knocks it down. You build it stronger so it doesn't happen again." Trump nodded thoughtfully. "How are things at Pinecrest? I heard Dixon representatives showed up uninvited." "Emma handled it," Bill said, though concern creased his forehead. "But they're watching us, pressuring us." "We'll increase security," Trump promised. "But be careful, Bill. These companies play rough when they're threatened." 3 days later, the administration unveiled the Rural Processing Revitalization Plan. It was a bold countermove to Dixon's threats. offering expedited permits, guaranteed loans, and technical assistance to help independent processors rapidly expand capacity. Simultaneously, the Justice Department announced an investigation into whether Dixon's threatened plant closures constituted illegal market manipulation. The response was immediate and fierce. Dixon's stock dropped 12% in a single day. Rural communities near the threatened plants, initially panicked about job losses, now saw potential opportunities as multiple smaller processors announced expansion plans that would ultimately create more jobs than would be lost. Most significantly, the narrative shifted. What Dixon had intended as a story about government overreach causing food shortages became a story about corporate bullying being countered by entrepreneurial resilience. For the next 2 weeks, Bill traveled relentlessly across farm country, meeting with independent processors, farmer cooperatives, and rural economic development groups to coordinate implementation of the new plan. He was no longer just a symbolic figure, but an active architect of agricultural transformation. Meanwhile, Emma managed increasing pressure at Pinecrest Farm. Dixon's surveillance continued, drones regularly appearing over their property despite cease and desist letters from their attorney. Anonymous callers left threatening messages. Local suppliers who had done business with the Andersons for generations suddenly found reasons to delay deliveries or increase prices. On a rain-soaked Tuesday evening, Emma was completing paperwork. In the office they'd set up in what was once their formal dining room when headlights swept across the window. She tensed, checking the time. 9:45 p.m., far too late for casual visitors. The Secret Service detail assigned to the property had changed. Shifts an hour ago, but Agent Martinez should be stationed at the end of the driveway. Her phone rang. Agent Martinez. Miss Anderson, there's a vehicle approaching the house. Driver claims to be Jeffrey Wilson from Heartland Bank. Says it's urgent business about your loan. Emma frowned. Our loan officer is Sandra Perkins, not Jeffrey Wilson. That's what I thought. Stay inside, lock the doors. I'm intercepting. Emma moved to the window, watching as the Secret Service agent's vehicle pulled across the driveway, blocking the approaching car. Through the rain, she could see Agent Martinez approaching. The vehicle, hand near his weapon. A brief conversation followed. Then the car reversed hastily and sped away. Her phone rang again. Driver had identification for Heartland Bank, but it was clearly fake, Martinez reported. I've reported the license plate to local authorities. After thanking him, Emma sank into a chair, adrenaline still coursing through her system. The pressures were escalating, from surveillance to intimidation to whatever this night visit had been intended to accomplish. She called her father, who was in Minnesota, touring a processing facility. They're getting desperate, Bill said after hearing about the incident. The revitalization plan is working. Independent processors are stepping up faster than anyone expected. Dixon's seeing their monopoly power eroding in real time. That makes them more dangerous, not less, Emma pointed out. Dad, I think I should come to Washington with you for a while. This farm has survived periods of absentee management before. Let me think about it, Bill replied, though his tone suggested he was already considering the same option. I'll be home tomorrow. We'll decide then. But events accelerated before Bill could return to Nebraska. At 3:17 a.m., Emma was awakened by the farm's security system, fire alarms blaring, smoke detectors activated in multiple zones. She scrambled out of bed, rushing to the window to see orange flames illuminating the night sky, not at the house, but at the equipment shed where the vintage John Deere tractor was stored. The tractor that had become a symbol of the Anderson initiative. Secret Service agents were already responding, but the fire had taken firm hold. By the time local firefighters arrived, the shed was fully engulfed. They managed to prevent the flames from spreading to nearby structures, but the shed itself and everything inside it was destroyed. As dawn broke over the smoldering ruins, Fire Chief Donovan approached Emma, his expression grim. "This wasn't an accident," he said, keeping his voice low to avoid being overheard by the gathered emergency responders. "We found clear evidence of accelerant use, multiple points of origin." Emma stared at the blackened remains of the shed where her grandfather had taught her to repair engines, where her father had demonstrated the satisfaction of maintaining your own equipment, where a president had driven a tractor and gained new perspective on rural America. "You should call your father," Chief Donovan advised gently. When Bill answered, the exhaustion in his voice suggested he already knew. "How bad?" he asked simply. "The shed's gone. The tractor too. Everything." Emma struggled to keep her voice steady. "They're saying arson." A long silence followed, filled only by the sound of Bill's measured breathing as he processed this escalation from intimidation to destruction. "I'm coming home," he said finally, "and then we're going to finish this." The image was powerful. Bill and Emma Anderson, standing amid the charred remains of their equipment shed, the President of the United States beside them, all three surveying the destruction with expressions of grim determination. White House photographers captured the moment, from multiple angles as news helicopters circled overhead. Trump had diverted his planned trip to Chicago when he heard about the fire, arriving at Pinecrest Farm with minimal advance notice and a full security detail. The symbolism wasn't subtle, the president standing literally beside the Andersons. In the face of apparent corporate intimidation, "Whoever did this," Trump declared to the assembled press, "has committed not just arson, but an attack on the values that built this country. Hard work, determination, independence." He placed a hand on Bill's shoulder. "The Anderson family has stood up for family farmers across America. Today, America stands with them." The president announced a federal investigation into the fire and a series of new measures strengthening the Anderson initiative, including criminal penalties for corporate intimidation of agricultural activists and whistleblowers. As the official event concluded and the press began packing up their equipment, Trump pulled Bill and Emma aside for a private conversation away from the microphones. "This crossed a line," he said, his voice hardened with genuine anger. "We're not just talking policy disagreements anymore. We're talking criminal intimidation." "We've stirred up a hornet's nest," Bill observed, echoing his earlier words to Agent Taylor. "This goes beyond hornets," Trump replied, "but they miscalculated. Badly. Americans don't respond well to bullies, especially when those bullies are threatening their food supply." He looked at the destroyed shed, then back to Bill. "What was in there besides the tractor? What did you lose?" Bill's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Family history, my father's tools, my grandfather's workbench, things that can't be replaced." Trump nodded slowly, understanding the deeper cost. "What do you need from me?" "Finish what we started," Bill said simply. "Don't let them win." The arson at Pinecrest Farm backfired spectacularly for Dixon's cause. Images of the destroyed shed, juxtaposed with earlier photos of Trump driving the now incinerated vintage tractor, dominated news cycles. The narrative crystallized not as a complex policy dispute, but as a simple morality tale, corporate interests destroying a family's heritage to protect their monopoly power. Public opinion, already trending against agricultural consolidation, hardened further. Farmers who had remained on the sidelines now openly embraced the Anderson initiative. Consumer groups organized boycotts of Dixon products. Congress, responding to constituent pressure, fast-tracked legislation, codifying the executive orders into permanent law, making them harder to reverse by future administrations. 3 weeks after the fire, as Bill testified before Congress in support of the Agricultural Competition and Fairness Act, news broke that the FBI had arrested 2 men in connection with the arson. Both had ties to a security firm contracted by Dixon's parent company. While Dixon's executives denied any knowledge of the plot, the damage to their public image was catastrophic. That evening, Bill received an unexpected call from Harold Dixon himself, the 3rd-generation CEO of the agricultural giant that bore his family name. "This has gone too far, Anderson," Dixon began without introduction. "Those men acted without our authorization or knowledge." "Maybe," Bill allowed, his tone making clear his skepticism, "but they served your interests. We're business people, not criminals," Dixon insisted. "I'm calling to suggest we find a way forward that works for everyone, a compromise." Bill leaned back in his chair, digesting this sudden shift from opposition to negotiation. "I'm listening. We recognize that certain reforms are inevitable," Dixon continued. "We're prepared to accept enhanced antitrust enforcement and right-to-repair provisions. In exchange, we ask for reasonable implementation timelines and a seat at the table as regulations are finalized." "Why the change of heart?" Bill asked. "Reality," Dixon replied simply. "We overplayed our hand with the plant closure threats. The revitalization plan proved we're not as indispensable as we thought. And now, with the arson investigation," he sighed audibly, "the political winds have shifted. We'd rather help shape the new reality than be destroyed by it." After the call, Bill sat quietly in his Washington apartment, watching the lights of the Capitol through his window. The conversation marked a turning point, from resistance to recognition, from opposition to adaptation. The fight wasn't over, but its nature had fundamentally changed. His phone buzzed with a text from the president. "Dixon called me too. They're surrendering without saying they're surrendering. Well done, Bill." 6 months later, Bill and Emma stood together on the porch of the Pinecrest Farmhouse, watching as construction crews put the finishing touches on the new equipment shed, larger and more modern than its predecessor, but built on the same spot, using the same red paint that had identified Anderson buildings for generations. The past half year had seen remarkable transformations. The Agricultural Competition and Fairness Act had passed with bipartisan support, enshrining the Anderson Initiative's core principles into permanent law. Dixon and other agricultural conglomerates had restructured their operations to comply with the new reality, selling off monopolistic holdings and adapting their business models. Most significantly, the trend of family farm loss had reversed for the first time in decades. New farmers were starting operations, encouraged by programs making land access and financing more available. Existing family farms were expanding again, no longer constrained by corporate monopolies on processing and distribution. At Pinecrest Farm, life had found a new rhythm. Emma had fully embraced her role as the farm's primary operator, implementing innovations that increased both productivity and sustainability. Bill divided his time between Washington and Nebraska, continuing his advisory role while gradually transitioning more responsibilities to younger farm advocates he had mentored. The vintage John Deere tractor, destroyed in the fire, had been replaced by an identical model donated by a farmers' cooperative in Iowa, a symbol of solidarity and resilience. "President's arriving in 20 minutes, Emma noted, checking her watch. "Think he'll want to drive the new tractor?" Bill smiled. "Probably. Some things don't change." Today marked the 2nd anniversary of Trump's initial visit to Pinecrest Farm, a visit now commemorated annually as a symbol of the unlikely partnership that had reshaped American agricultural policy. This year's event would unveil the results of a nationwide study showing dramatic improvements in rural economic indicators since the initiative's implementation. As they waited, Bill reflected on the journey that had begun with a hastily written letter born of frustration and desperation. He had never sought influence or power. He had simply wanted to be heard, to have someone in authority understand the reality of what their policies meant for people like him. The sound of approaching helicopters broke his reverie. Marine One appeared over the horizon, followed by its decoy aircraft preparing to land in the cleared field where a platform and podium had been erected. "Still feels surreal," Emma commented as they watched the presidential approach. "Sometimes I wake up and can't believe any of this happened." Bill nodded. "All because he actually listened." "And because you had the courage to speak," Emma added, squeezing her father's arm affectionately. As the helicopter touched down and Secret Service agents fanned out across the property, Bill straightened. His tie, a concession to the formality of the occasion, though he still wore his work boots beneath his suit pants. Some things remained non-negotiable. President Trump emerged from Marine One, waving to the gathered crowd of farmers, officials, and media. When he spotted Bill and Emma on the porch, he changed direction, heading straight for them rather than the official greeting party waiting by the podium. "The Andersons!" he called as he approached, extending his hand first to Bill, then to Emma. "How's the new shed?" "Ready for its grand opening," Bill replied. "And there's a tractor inside with your name on it." Trump grinned, the expression surprisingly genuine for a man often characterized by strategic calculation. "Looking forward to it." He glanced at the waiting officials. "We'll talk more after the formalities." As the president moved toward the podium to deliver his remarks, Emma leaned toward her father. "You know what today really is, don't you?" Bill raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Harvest time," Emma said simply. "You planted something unexpected 2 years ago. Today we're seeing what grew from it." Bill nodded slowly, watching as the president began addressing the crowd, speaking about the transformation of American agriculture under the Anderson Initiative. The metaphor was apt. Every farmer understood that between planting and harvest came periods of uncertainty, threat, and hardship. What mattered was perseverance, the stubborn determination to see things through. From his vantage point on the porch of the home his great-grandfather had built, Bill could see beyond the immediate gathering to the fields stretching toward the horizon, fields that would remain in his family for generations to come because one day a powerful man had been willing to listen, and a stubborn farmer had been brave enough to speak the truth. Their heated debate in a farmhouse kitchen had indeed led to something unexpected, not just policy change, but a fundamental shift in who had a voice in decisions affecting millions of lives. It was a reminder that in a democracy, even the most entrenched systems could be changed when ordinary people refused to be silent. As Bill moved to join the president for the ceremony, he carried this knowledge with him, that sometimes the most powerful act isn't speaking to crowds or writing laws, but simply having the courage to tell your truth to power. And sometimes, even more rarely, that power actually listens. Later that afternoon, after the speeches and ceremonies had concluded, Bill found himself once again sitting across from President Trump, this time at the new picnic table Emma had installed behind the farmhouse. The official entourage had been politely directed to give them space, creating a momentary island of privacy amid the day's public events. 2 years, Trump mused, sipping lemonade Emma had prepared before discreetly withdrawing to give the men space to talk. "Who would have thought that letter of yours would lead to all this?" Bill shook his head. "Not me. That's for certain. I was just venting frustration, never expected a response, let alone a visit." "Why did you write it then?" Trump asked, genuinely curious. "If you didn't think it would make a difference." Bill considered the question, looking out over the fields where his ancestors had worked the same soil for generations. "I suppose I wrote it because silence felt like surrender, like giving up, and Andersons don't give up." Trump nodded, understanding. You know, I get thousands of letters. Usually my staff handles them. Something about yours made me want to see for myself. What was that? Bill asked. Trump shrugged. Authenticity, maybe. No political language, no talking points, just raw truth from someone with something real at stake. He paused, uncharacteristically reflective. In my world, that's rare. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two men from vastly different backgrounds who had nonetheless found common purpose. Beyond them, the new equipment shed stood as a testament to resilience, to the refusal to be intimidated or silenced. The initiative will outlast my administration, Trump said finally. That's what matters. We've created something that can't easily be undone, even by future presidents who might want to. Because it works, Bill observed simply, not just for farmers, but for consumers, rural communities, the entire food system. Competition is healthier than monopoly, always has been. Trump raised his glass in a small toast. To unlikely partnerships, Bill clinked his glass against the president's, and unexpected outcomes. As the sun began to set over Pinecrest Farm, casting long shadows across the land that had nearly been lost, but was now secure for generations to come, Bill Anderson reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from desperate farmer to presidential advisor, from policy victim to policy architect. It had all begun with a heated debate, an honest confrontation between power and truth. What followed had indeed been unexpected, not just for him, but for family farmers across America. A new chapter was beginning, not just for the Andersons, but for American agriculture itself. The monopolies had been checked, the playing field leveled, the future brightened for those who worked the land with their own hands, rather than managed it through corporate algorithms. And it had all started because a farmer had spoken truth to power, and for once, remarkably, power had actually listened. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.